in these 20 years that the U.S. and the foreign coalition is controlling Afghanistan, there are multiple efforts to westernize the country, a lot of effort to improve education and human rights, access to knowledge. This is a time that a lot of the diaspora that left during previous governments start to return to Afghanistan. And during all of that time, there's still conflict, there's still violence, still poverty. The levels of participation in education are still low, very low. There's a huge difference between what's going on in the cities and what's going on in the more peripheral areas, but still there is very obvious shift and progress, and people feel that they are heading towards maybe a different future. In July 2018 starts some secret negotiation between the US and the Taliban that becomes full-on peace talks on February 2019. The Afghan government and the Afghan people are not part of these negotiations, only towards the end. And then we see towards the summer, even it starts in the spring, a bit more shifting of power in Afghanistan. The US declares that it's going to retreat its forces, and then the Taliban forces are starting to take over, completing this in the end of the summer. Basically, in August 15, they are surprisingly taking over Kabul. And then there's a lot of people trying to leave the country. Some of them are people who collaborated with the foreign forces. Some of them were involved with the previous government. Some were involved with all kinds of efforts related to human rights, or all kinds of professions that may not be very acceptable for the new regime, put them in danger. So a lot of people are trying to leave the country. And at that point, the states that were involved in the coalition and various individuals are helping people to leave. They have flights that if you are in a list and you can make it to the airport, you can get on a flight and leave to the country that you're involved with. If you helped NATO, if you worked with Germany, that country will aid and help you both leave the country and have an entry visa. On August 31st, the US forces were the last to leave, and it actually begins a new era where a lot of people are still trying to leave the country, but there are no more state-related evacuations. And it actually leaves people in a different situation, in a more complex situation. They have to rely on individuals. They have to rely on international and transnational organizations. But at the same time, we have to remember that we cannot travel between states. We cannot enter states without states' approval. So on the one hand, we have states removing their support or their part in these operations, and at the same time, you cannot rescue or extract people without taking them somewhere, without having passports, without entry visas or refugee status. So it kind of leaves us in a complex situation where people are trying to leave, and the situation is less of international and more of trying to figure out what to do in a more partisanic way, I would say. Yes. So I will ask now Nomi to try and make a little bit more concrete comments on this chaotic moment where we're going to start our conversation from.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon because we are about to hear an amazing story told and acted by a group of amazing people, mostly women. And I almost feel bad that I have to introduce this by, I was asked to talk about the context in terms of international relations and political science. So I will pose 3 questions, which I want us to think about while we're listening to the story and while we're digging down into a series of just amazing experiences, courage, audacity, and creativity, and pure human dedication and commitment. So I'll start with the key question. What is going on now regarding Afghanistan, but not only Afghanistan, a lot of civilian displacement and refugee movements, begs a critical question, and that is, what happens when many states and governments are not doing what they're supposed to be doing? They're not fulfilling their obligations. Not according to international law, not according to conventions, not according to their obligations to their own citizens. What happens? And we see that at least 3 groups or 3 entities enter into the fray. First of all, and this is an innovation, I think, of the 21st century to a large extent, a lot of individuals come in. They wake up one day and they say, we cannot allow this refugee problem to continue without doing something. We'll hear what can be done in a few minutes. A second element that comes in more forcefully in recent years is an entire network of NGOs, primarily international NGOs, that liaise with the individuals or the individuals liaise with them. And the third element are certain governments, maybe not those obliged to be involved, but others, they come in as actors as well. Some do it for purely economic reasons. Albania may be an example in this case. Some do it for political strategic reasons. And we have actors in this story that do it for that reason as well. And some do it because they are trying to protect an international order that is not functioning well. But if you put it all together, when a formal system is not working, an informal system kicks in. What are its advantages? What are its disadvantages? Who benefits? Who loses? So that's question number 1, writ large. This leads me to a second question, because not everybody on this webinar is interested necessarily in international relations. Those who are interested in Israeli foreign policy may ask themselves, why is Israel as a state not part of this story, but many Israelis made this story, are an integral part of it. Why? Israel was among the first countries to promote an international convention on refugees, signed in 1951. It dramatically encouraged this convention. It's a signatory to the Protocol of 1967. Menachem Begin brought in Vietnamese boat refugees when he first became prime minister. Refugees from Sarajevo were brought to Israel in the 1990s. But when an appeal was made to allow 167, mostly women, young women, to come into Israel, it was rejected. Israelis didn't give up, but the state did. Why? What is the role of Israel in this new international formal and informal exchange? Second question. And the third question I'd like to pose relates to what are the implications of what we will be hearing about. And I would like to suggest that there are implications at least on 3 levels, and I would dearly love somebody to connect them as well. The first level is obviously the implications for world order, or is it disorder? The old system of rules related to refugees is not working, but it has not been revised. People found ways to bypass it, but not to institute something else. So how do we reimpose some kind of governing set of conventions on one of the most important humanitarian issues of this century? So that's implications for the world system. Second set of implication relates to states. This human crisis is happening because some states are collapsing, others are failing, and others are becoming maybe too strong for their own good. Now there's a hierarchy of states here, in gross inequality, which is upsetting the world order, but not helping it reform in more egalitarian ways. So what's happening to the state system? And the third relates actually to the individuals. When we come to think of it, those who have succeeded in getting out, in finding refuge, are actually the strongest, the best educated, the best connected, maybe. Some countries are going to benefit for the amazing human resources they bring. But what about those left behind? There is a humanitarian crisis now inside Afghanistan. How did we deal with that? So some thoughts maybe to frame what we're about to hear. And I just want to end by saying, I've heard this story often, and it can constantly boggles my mind. Chapeau to all of you who were involved in this. You are a credit to all of us, and I think to humanity. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing the story once again.
Thank you so much, Nomi. So what we will do now is to have a round of response. I will ask one question, and then Dana, Oni, and Yotam. Anhita is not to be here today. We lost her completely. So we will have them respond to a list of questions, and then we'll move to the next question. So the first question I wanted to ask them was, how did they get involved in this operation, and what was their specific role in bringing it to such success? So Dana, the floor is yours. You're muted. Stop, you're muted.
Hi, sorry about that. Hi, I'm Dana Harmon, and I'm sitting in a supermarket in our camp in Albania, which is where the second group of refugees that we helped bring out are living here in Albania, and I'm here with them, and this is the best place to work. So that's the context of where I'm sitting. And I wanted to thank you, Tal, for having us, and thank you, Nomi, for that really kind of thought-provoking framing of the question. And I wanted to start responding to you, Tal, but I wanted to say, before I talk about how I got involved, already responding to something that Nomi, who by the way is my aunt, my brilliant aunt Nomi, so thank you for that, Nomi, and that's why I think she's heard the story so many times, is that, okay, so it was July, August, and people who were paying attention to Afghanistan were watching what was going on there. And apropos, the large players' roles, I was just sort of watching what was going on in terms of the USA, and I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it. I mean, there had been talk for months, maybe years, of the USA departing, but the way it was done, and I'm a dual citizen, and I'm often critical of things Israel does, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, but as an American, I was really like flabbergasted, because I had been to Afghanistan several times as a journalist. I had been there embedded with US troops and with British troops. And then again, I had gone there for a longer period of time to write a feature article about the all-girls robotics team who are based in Herat. So I knew Afghanistan a little bit. I'm no Afghan expert, but I also knew how the Americans had played a role over the past 20 years, really sort of raising expectations and telling people to dream big, telling young women that they were going to take over their country, that they were the future, telling people that Afghanistan was changing, America was there with them, bringing in an enormous amount of money into that country, some of which was misused, a lot of it which was diverted to some of the wrong things, some of it sent to the right places. But anyway, they were very active there, and to pull out in the way that they did, I think that they left people shocked. People to this moment cannot believe what has gone on there. And I had a really interesting talk here at the camp. Our IsraAid group is here, together with two other large groups that were evacuated by another organization. And the other organization evacuated a man here who has one leg. He's an older man, and he was a top general in the Afghan military, in the defense ministry. He was number 2 there. And his son, who was American educated and about to marry his American girlfriend, was head of the special forces in Afghanistan and was killed in a battle there in July. fighting the Taliban. So he's sort of like something of a national hero. And he spent the past 20 years, this general, working with his American counterparts and knows America well. And we sat on his balcony. We were shy in approaching him. And I don't know him because, again, he's from the second group. But finally, we're like, we should just go talk to this general. So we go and sit on his balcony in the camp and spent a long afternoon talking to him. And basically, his understanding of what just happened to his country involves an enormous conspiracy theory of the United States that always wanted to create more terror in Afghanistan because they want to destabilize Iran and they want to destabilize China and they want to destabilize Russia. And he has a whole very intricate explanation and a lot of sort of facts and figures and backing this all up. And I don't know if he's right or wrong. I've been thinking about it a lot. But if someone that senior who spent that much time with Americans comes out of the experience of America's time in Afghanistan thinking that America has really done everything wrong. He says when America started, there were tens of thousands of terrorists, and now they've created hundreds of thousands of terrorists. And all the Afghans that worked alongside the Americans and other Westerners who are now feeling so betrayed, to turn them, your best allies, against the United States. Anyway, all this was going through my head I didn't know that part of it, but these thoughts and these questions were going through my head in July and August. And at that time, I write for Haaretz. I asked them if they wanted a little piece about some of basically, they're my friends, my girlfriends. They're all younger than me. They're like younger sisters, these girls on the robotics team that I spent a lot of time with. And I contacted them. They're in touch with me, but I contacted them because I wanted to write something about them for Haaretz. And then I just started understanding what dire straits they were in and how scared they were and how much they needed help. And as Tal said, I felt really, I felt very, like there was nothing I can do until I thought, you know what, why not try and get involved in some way? In that, I just know people, especially if you know people with money or with wherewithal or with good ideas. It's not like the Afghans didn't have good ideas or wherewithal, but they didn't have the courage, I think, or the money to try to do things for themselves. Or did they know the right people? And that gets to another question we can get into later. Another thing Nomi talked about, which is having to do with who are the people getting out? Are they just lucky ones? Are they people that are specifically vulnerable? Or are they people that happen to know, me or many other people like me? So that's a whole other question we can get to later. But anyway, that is how I first got involved. First, just texting with these girls, figuring out where they were, what they were doing, what the options are, and then reaching out to basically just friends of mine, anyone I could think of who might have ideas. I have a lot of friends who have involvement in Afghanistan, mostly, I guess, journalists. A lot of journalists got involved in evacuations. And the other group that got very involved on a grassroots level are former service people who spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, especially American troops who became very close to some of their Afghan colleagues who also felt like America as a nation was really doing wrong by Afghanistan. And so a lot of us just started talking, figuring out what was going on, what was possible. And not long after that, I reached out. I have a group of girlfriends in Tel Aviv, it's like my best friends. And we started out as a group that watched Homeland together, which is ironic. And so I think we're called like Friends of Evgeny, who's one of the good looking characters on the show. And I kept either updating them or asking them for ideas. They're all smart women and also know a lot about a lot. And then one of them, of course, to pass on the baton here, is Roni Abulafia, who then became my partner in crime on this. And then Roni quickly brought in Yotam Politzer, who is the CEO of IsraAid, because right from the beginning, we knew that this wasn't something this was something that really needed also some experts. And Yotam is the CEO of an organization that works, although not with evacuations and not with Afghanistan, but with issues having to do with, he'll explain for himself, but emergency and aid. And it was a world that he knew certainly better than either me or Ronnie or Charlene, who couldn't join us today. And at the very beginning, I reached out to these two women in Canada who are lawyers, who I didn't even actually know. They're like friends of friends. So we're this sort of ad hoc group on WhatsApp, and we just started putting our head together and trying to think, okay, this is what's going on in Afghanistan. What can we do to help? So it was a very long-winded answer, but that's how I got involved.
And what you think you did? Like, what was, you think the core of what you were able to do? Like, you're part of this operation.
I mean, honestly, now that it's like a few months later and my head is, now I've actually taken a job with IsraAid. I'm normally a journalist, but I've come to work with IsraAid for a couple months because, and this is jumping way forward, what's really important is not only to extract people or to help them escape Afghanistan, but to find a pathway forward for them. And actually, it became almost trendy. Lots of people with no knowledge of how to do anything to try and figure out ways for their friends or contacts to get out of Afghanistan. But then people are stumped, like, then what do you do? And in the early days of August and a little bit of September, it was even easy. You could get people maybe across a border or into a neighboring country. But then what? Do you have the money to sustain them? Do you have the wherewithal and the knowledge about where they can go later and how they can? I mean, immigration is its own world, and they're not the only ones who are trying to get into Germany or Canada or the United States. There's hundreds of thousands of would-be immigrants and refugees all around the world, maybe more. So it's not enough to figure out how to get a bus through Kabul and up through a border and on these kind of Hassamba things that we actually ended up doing. But so what I was going to say is that from this perspective, looking back, I almost can't remember everything that went on. And it's a shame because I'm a writer and I haven't been taking notes because I've just been so over involved. I mean, thank God for WhatsApp. We're going to print them out one day to sort of follow up as to what happened day by day. But it's been so all consuming and so maybe like most important or most compelling thing that I've ever been involved in. But when I do take a step back or when I tell people about it or like in a forum like this, I realize that it was really like a miracle that it all came together. And I think that we can talk about it more. I don't want to be the only one talking, but I think that there was just so much involved between luck and also kind of not giving up. There was a sense, and I think that this is where us as Israelis were particularly or we were good at this. We just didn't give up. The amount of times that my husband or my brothers or anyone said to me, this is never going to work. This is never going to work. And we just kept going and we kept getting stuck on one thing and then we were trying the next thing. And it was really also difficult group dynamics between us because it's really hard. Me and Ronnie are old friends, but the rest of us just came together in the most intense environment you can imagine. And we really had to rely on each other and work together so intently. And we didn't sleep. I would say for like a month or more, we just didn't sleep working this out. And as it's happening also, we got so attached to the Afghans that we were working with. I knew the initial little group, but then it grew and grew. And Yotam can also talk to that about how other groups kind of came into our group. But and Ronnie will say also, we really love our friends. We really feel like we have this moment in time, it all came together and we felt bound by this journey. And I think they feel very much that way towards us. And all sorts of words like savior or saving us, I don't like, but I do feel like there's a special bond that I've never had with it before. So.
That's amazing. We'll hear more, but let's hear a little bit from Ronnie about how you got involved in this crazy operation. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay, good. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, so Dana was she started telling a little bit about how I got involved. So we have this, when Dana was trying to figure out how to help the robotics girls, she was actually on a vacation in Greece. And she was about to board a plane back to London, and she was worried about not having Wi-Fi. So she actually wrote on our little Homeland fans group who has Signal, the instant messaging app that is more encrypted. So And I wrote, I have it. So, and she wrote back, I'm calling you. And then from that moment on, I got sucked into this crazy operation that I had no experience in. But the only thing I had was like wanting to go on this adventure and wanting to, of course, help other people. But I think it was more of an adventure for me in the beginning. And so the way it started for me was that Dana and Yotam, I think, found this German, this group of German journalists and activists, also a lot of them women, that had organized a convoy of buses that were trying to get into the Kabul airport, to take people into the Kabul airport, because the Americans were still at the airport running evacuation flights. So the thought was, if you could get into the airport, you could board one of those American planes and they evacuate you to Qatar or to Saudi Arabia or something. And the Taliban had their checkpoints at the gates of the airport. So this German group gave us, I think, 3 or 4 seats on their buses. And so my first job was to coordinate between the German group running this convoy to the girls, the robotics girls and their families that were in hiding in Kabul. And of course, the minute Dana took off and turned her Wi-Fi off was the minute where they sent a message, tell your people to get to this location, sending a Google Maps location. They have to be there in half an hour. So that's how I got sucked into this. And then then we were involved, like, well, Dana landed, and we had our little WhatsApp group with Charlene, Dana, Yotam, and me, and we were trying to get people on those buses and follow what was happening with those buses, trying to give our best advice and directions if we could. This went on for about 60 hours. People were on the buses. They were trying to get in from one gate and then turned back by the Taliban, and then another gate. And it was 60 hours of like really sleepless days and nights where we were all sitting in our desks. And at the end of this, we did manage to get 4 people on those German convoys into the airport. And by that time, it was already, I think, August 30th, and the Americans cleared the airport. So the situation was that whoever couldn't get into the airport by that time had no way out. So that's where we started trying to think of land crossings, land evacuation, about the possibilities to enter neighboring countries. We had no experience in this, so we were literally opening maps, trying to figure out which countries neighbor Afghanistan and what could be good border crossings. And then I will move on. I mean, Yotam can continue from here, because the breakthrough was this guy that he knew from previous work that he had done with refugees that was able to help us in that sense. So
Yotam, Ronnie magically gave you the torch. So there you go.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. Yeah, I mean, so just a little bit about my background and IsraAid for those of you who are not aware. So IsraAid is a non-governmental, non-political organization that was actually established 20 years ago. One of the founders I see is here, Meira, who also happened to be Ronnie's mother. So it's all one big family here, as you can figure out. IsraAid was established really by a group of activists who wanted to take expertise, technology, know-how that was developed in Israel and bring it to the world's most vulnerable communities. And since 2001, we responded to crisis in 56 countries. So our 56th operation is actually in Afghanistan. Right now, globally, we have a team of 250 staff members and a network of about 6,000 volunteers. So it's not so small. It's pretty well established. And in that sense, we are really focusing mostly on kind of more organized relief operations. So we work a lot in refugee camps with the Syrian refugees. We work with Venezuelan refugees in Colombia, with South Sudanese refugees in Uganda and Kenya. But we're not really dealing with evacuation and extraction. So we have very good understanding of these communities and their needs. But yes, evacuating this kind of rescue mission was very new to us. Personally, I'm in this field for the last 13 years, and I was running our missions and operations in Japan after the tsunami, in Nepal after the earthquake, in Sierra Leone during the Ebola outbreak, and I also did a lot of work with the Syrian refugees, primarily in Greece, in Lesbos, when hundreds of thousands of Syrians were there. And actually, my side of the story, I mean, you heard how basically Ronnie reached out to me, and we knew each other from before. We were all trying to see if we can help with connection and getting people on the plane. But the idea for land crossing, or the possibility to do it, came when I spoke to a friend who is Danish guy, Danish citizen, but originally from an Arab country, and his partner, who works with him in the same organization called Team Humanity. It's a Danish NGO. They worked with us during the program we had in Lesbos, Greece, to support Syrian refugees. And long story short, this guy told me that they can ensure safe crossing through the Taliban checkpoints, because this guy that was originally from Afghanistan, his family had some contacts in the Taliban, in a specific part of the Taliban that was kind of controlling the border to Tajikistan, one of the neighboring countries to the north. We obviously didn't know what it actually means, but we decided to give it a shot, because we realized that the evacuation by flight was not working, and one big event that Ronnie didn't mention was the bombings, the last kind of suicide bomb in the Kabul airport that killed over 100 people, including 13 Americans and many Afghans. So it was really clear that it's very dangerous to try to evacuate people by flights, by planes, and land crossing was something that nobody tried yet. It was really just a couple of days after the American left. So using this guy's contact, we basically organized a bus, and think about a school bus, a Tiyul Shnati, that picks up everyone from their hiding places in Kabul. Dana and Ronnie was in contact with the Afghans to coordinate that on different WhatsApp and Signal groups, and sending locations from here and from there. Basically, the bus picked up a group of 42 women and girls. I didn't mention another important partner in this operation, which was after I was in touch with Ronnie and Dana. I got we received another request for rescue from another good friend. His name is Josh, who is on our board, and he's working very closely with Sylvan Adams. the Canadian-Israeli philanthropist. And Sylvan wanted to help the group of girls cyclists who are also kind of high profile in Afghanistan. They were in National Geographic and Discovery, and people. They were also a symbol of women empowerment in the country, similar to the robotics team. I think the robotics team was even more high profile because they were very famous globally, but also the cycling team was quite well known. And it was clear that, in the best case scenario, they wouldn't be able to ride their bikes and pursue their career in Afghanistan. In the worst case scenario, they could be actually targeted for riding their bikes. So the group the 42 people that we, the group of 42 that we arranged included mainly the robotics team and their families and the cycling girls and few others that we heard of that, and people that we were connected with, like there was a famous singer, there was a police officer, there's different people. So I don't know. I know it comes later, but if we're going to jump into the James Bond or Fauda operation side, but that's when we put together the bus, and this bus was heading to the border with Tajikistan. And I guess I'll stop here.
Okay, we're missing one part of the story, and this is our person in Tajikistan, and Roni will take over telling a little bit about her work before we move on.
Okay, so many people helped around the world. It was like really a multinational thing. And when we started thinking about Tajikistan, we were trying to figure out, okay, who do we know in Tajikistan? And I was actually sure we could find like some Israeli businessmen selling arms or cyber or something to Tajikistan that could help us find like some contact there, some contact person that we can work with. And I spent like hours on the phone with people trying to figure out who knew anybody in Tajikistan. And there's actually a funny story. Somebody told me that there was a parliamentary friendship delegation, Israel parliament to Tajikistan parliament, and that Sharen Haskel, member of Knesset, she headed it. So, and Yossi Yona. So I called her and I called Yossi Yona, and I asked Yossi Yona, told me, no, I don't know anybody. I don't remember. I didn't keep in touch. And I said, don't you know about any Israeli businessman doing business there, selling arms or cyber or something? And he said, no, actually, the one thing I remember that they were interested in two things, education and agriculture. So I hit a wall there. And then we contacted the Israeli ambassador. She's in Tashkent, but she's responsible for Tajikistan also. She was amazing. Her name is Zavit Bar Hillel. She has also a big part in it. And she introduced us to a Tajiki journalist. Her name is Anahita. She was supposed to be here. And she became our point person in Tajikistan, trying to push her government or their government to open up the border for our little bus that already started driving up north from Kabul. And she was, I think that Naomi was talking about it before, about, I think that was the most challenging thing in the whole operation is opening borders, and why are countries closing their borders, and why would they open it? What would be a good enough reason for the neighboring country Tajikistan to open its border? So that was Anahita's part, and she was very effective. We had finally, we found Mr. Alexander Mashikevich. Yotam got in contact with him, and he connected us to the Minister of Industry in Tajikistan. And this minister was very helpful. he really wanted to help, and he helped. And Anahita did, a lot of the contact and work there. So that was her part.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just interject?
Go ahead.
To the extent that we were looking for connections. So for example, I know Dorit Musayev, who is a famous jeweler in London, and someone told me that she is the jeweler of the president of Tajikistan's wife, so we're calling her. Now we heard the president of Tajikistan, he's a great fan of this particular Bukharan dancer who we found out lives in New Jersey. So I had my dad looking up the Bukharan Association of New Jersey to find if we could get to this dancer. I mean, we truly tried everything, and we reached out to everyone we knew. And then later, we're jumping all over the place because, of course, we had 2 evacuations. Second evacuation, we had even more problems getting into Tajikistan. And at that point, we just went all out looking for any connection to the Tajik president. We felt we needed to convince him which Hollywood stars could make a video, praising him. We had so many fakakta ideas, and we just went for all of them. That's another thing about just keep trying to just go for any idea that, someone raised. We talked to this really, I don't know how to put it, hippy dippy group in California that suggested that we say that we're doing basically a Burning Man, like a big festival in Tajikistan, and we're bringing out these people to come to Tajikistan for a festival. We had 1,000,001 ideas, and 1,000,000 of them didn't work, and then 1 or 2 did work. I just wanted to add that.
Well, if you already started, why don't you tell us a little bit about the second operation and what went wrong with it?
I think we should finish the first operation, because it's our fault because we're jumping all around. But the first operation, okay, so these are the problems. First, it's for someone from Afghanistan to be able to leave Afghanistan. How do you get out? Either by a plane, and then that route was really finished by the end of August. It was almost the Americans left, everyone left the airport in Kabul, and that didn't seem an option. So then the next one was the land crossing, and as Yotam outlined, that's what we went for. And then you have to find a country. So you look at all the bordering countries, which one might work, and we hit on Tajikistan. But then there are like 3 million refugees headed towards Tajikistan. Why would Tajikistan let in our 42? So you have to prove to Tajikistan that you're not staying there. That's really important to them. They don't want those refugees to come live in Dushanbe. They want them to come in as maybe a favor to us once we've reached the president, and then to quickly leave. So then you have to find a country that will take them to quickly leave. A final country where they might live is not going to accept them that quickly. It's a long process, even, there's no way it can't be a process, right? So our eyes were always on Canada. We always thought Canada has been one of the most generous countries historically, and now with receiving immigrants. And also a lot of refugees want to go there, both because they have family and they've heard the social services are very good. And so that's what we were aiming for. And in order to get it was like a domino effect. In order for Tajikistan to let us in, we had to prove that we were leaving soon. And then we wanted to be leaving to Canada, but we knew it would take more than 3 days to get to Canada. It would take months. But we got Canada on board by calling up, for example, Irwin Cutler, who was the former Minister of Justice in Canada, who's a friend of my family and a friend of Yotam's. We got to him through all sorts of different ways to ask them to write a letter saying that they looked positively on this amazing group of women. And every time we were rewriting it, these women were, by the time we finished writing about them, they were the smartest high-tech girls in the entire country and the top cyclists that ever lived in the history of cycling, even though half of them were like novices on the cycling team and couldn't exactly cycle. But by the time we finished packaging it, then by the time it went to Canada, and then the letter gets back to Tajikistan saying, yes, we are looking favorably upon to them entering our country. But again, Tajikistan didn't want them to sit there for the 3 months or 4 months that it might take to process them to Canada. So we had to find yet another country that would take them and let them sit there for a while. And that's where, and I'm going to throw it over to Yotam, the United Arab Emirates and Abu Dhabi came into the picture. So Yotam.
Yeah, so really the biggest challenge was there were many challenges, but one of the major challenges was actually on the diplomatic front, with countries who will be willing to accept these people either for a few hours in the case of Tajikistan, or for a few months in the case of the Emirates and later Albania, because we realized that it will take a few months in the best case scenario for these people to reach their final destination, which we were hoping. And finally, it's actually moving forward that they'll end up in Canada, most of them. So with Abu Dhabi, it was interesting because once they crossed to Tajikistan, basically when we were able finally, thanks to the support from these business people, when we were able to convince the Tajiki government to accept them, they told us it will be under one condition, that we'll have to take them out in 24 hours. And I actually signed a letter saying that we will take them out in 24 hours, and we had no idea where we'll take them. But we just wanted them out of Afghanistan. So once they were in Tajikistan, we started to call again everyone, and we made a list of countries. And through a friend, common friend of Dana and me, we were able to reach actually a very famous Lebanese TV host and producer who lives in Abu Dhabi and is very close to the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Zayed. So when he heard about the group, the robotics, the cycling girls, they're coming from Afghanistan, both their vulnerability, but also about the Israeli connection, he felt it was a very important story, and that they should help. So he called Mohammed bin Zayed, and in 10 minutes, he called me back and said, we'll take them. And then immediately the Emiratis, which we now became kind of our close friends, have been extremely efficient, and they had like a whole team from the presidential office supporting us. We had Dana and Ronnie flew to Tajikistan and together with Anahita arranged things there. I was actually, when the whole thing started, I didn't mention I was in Japan. My wife is from Japan, and we were actually on a family visit there. So I flew from Japan to Abu Dhabi, and when the plane arrived, they received like a welcoming ceremony that would not shame like a prime minister. And these are a group of girls and their family members from Afghanistan, and a group of random Israelis in Abu Dhabi at like 2 a.m. in the morning. But it was beautiful. It was very moving to see. Actually, the first people who published about this operation, we were very, very careful. Again, another challenge that we had was dealing with the press around this, because obviously it's a very interesting and sexy and exotic story. But at the same time, we were very concerned about the fact that, first of all, this operation was still ongoing, and second, these people's families are still in Afghanistan. But anyway, the first people who actually published about it was the Emiratis, because they really wanted to show that the peace with Israel is and with Israeli organization, and that is not, is also about shared values and humanitarian support. So that really worked in our benefit. And then in Abu Dhabi, they took the group together with us to, I call it a 5-star refugee camp, although we now know it's not exactly a 5-star camp. There are some problems there, but it's a big facility that's called Humanitarian City, that they put together before for people who were quarantined during COVID. And it's basically like a huge, it looks like a meonot studentim. It really looks like kind of a lot of buildings but very dignified. They were all getting their COVID tests and put into rooms, and then basically we separated from them, after this kind of very emotional journey, and then I'll start kind of giving the hint for the second evacuation. We're basically done. We were all said, okay, that was already a huge effort and stress on all of us, and we really wanted to retire. But very quickly we realized that there are quite a few family members of these people that we evacuated that are still in Afghanistan. And Sorry, can you hear me? I lost my camera for some reason. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I hope you can see me. Some reason my computer went off. But so that we still have a lot of people in Afghanistan, and we received many requests from others. And we also thought that after this, first evacuation, which was very complicated, we figured it out and we already have all the right connection. So then we decided to arrange a bigger evacuation of 125 people, basically 3 buses. And I don't know, maybe Ronnie or Dana want to share how that went.
I can say that I had like 2 very difficult moments. One was when the girls from the first group crossed the border. And it's a bridge over a very big river between Afghanistan and Tajikistan, and we were all at home sitting on our computers, and Anahita and Salam were on the border waiting for them. And then Anahita or Salam, I don't remember, sent a video of these like figures in blue burqas, like it's a 7-second video of figures in blue burqas crossing the bridge. And I had such a breakdown at that moment. I think that was a very difficult moment for me, because that's when I actually realized that all these directions we're giving them and all of these, the things that we're doing actually can cost them maybe their freedom and maybe their lives. That was like after a few days or a week of doing this, that was the moment I realized that what I am actually doing. And the second moment what Yotam described, when we brought them into the humanitarian city in Abu Dhabi, and we all came into that place, and we spent like an hour or 2 with them there while they were getting their COVID tests and getting processed. And then we were free to go. I mean, they were taken to the rooms, and we were free to go to the hotel and then fly back home. And that was a moment for me that I realized that that's the big difference between us and them, that we have a country, and their country has collapsed, and that's why we have our freedom to go to a hotel and then go back home, and they have to stay in that place, and they're there until now. So that was also a very difficult, eye-opening moment for me. But as Yotam said, we were very happy and proud of everything we've done, and we figured out we have a method already, right? We have this guy on the ground in Afghanistan, and we have the Tajiki government's cooperation, and we have the Emiratis cooperating with us. So why don't we take another group out? And that group grew. Part of them were again 60. I think 57 of them were the cycling association, women cyclists from Afghanistan. And then there was another part of the group that was from the robotics team and their families, and all kinds of other groups that had started organizing and trying to figure out ways, like the women judges of Afghanistan. So we had one judge and her family in the group, and a journalist, and other women activists that really needed help because they were in hideouts and safe houses for the past months. So I think that was also very difficult thing for all of us, and very tense, and working on those lists and trying to figure out who gets on our evacuation list and who doesn't, and why. Basically, the biggest question is why. So that whole group of 125 came together, and the Danish Afghan guy on the ground set up the buses, and they started moving north. And when they got to the city of Kunduz, that's where our operation ran into a lot of trouble. And I'm gonna shift over to Dana maybe.
I wanted to take, again, sorry for the chronology, just way back a moment, because we forgot to tell an incredible part of this journey, which was a lot of Afghans don't have passports because they've just never left the country or their passports ran out. So about half of our original group did not have passports, and you need a passport to cross borders. Maybe you could get into Tajikistan on some humanitarian emergency, whatever, but you definitely can't keep going without passports. And so then we started figuring out, and again, going back to the fact that we tried everyone. There's someone who is a family friend of ours and is on the board of IsraAid, who used to be married to Michael Oren. Her name's Sally Oren, the great Sally Oren. She was married to Michael Oren, who was Israel's ambassador to Washington. And at the time, we all sort of remembered or re-remembered that she was friendly with the Afghan ambassador to Washington's wife at the time. And then so we thought, anything that's with the word Afghan on it, we're like running after it to find out if it can somehow help us. And then it turns out that ambassador and his wife had moved to Moscow. And then Yotam was in touch with him, Jawad, the ambassador in Moscow. And to make a very long story short, okay, he's no longer the ambassador because the Taliban are in control, but there's no other ambassador, and he has the keys to the embassy. And Yotam got him to go into the embassy with his staff and make us passports, which then were sent to Tajikistan. And then we met them at the border, Anahita and Salam. And then soon after, me and Roni met on a flight in Istanbul and flew to Tajikistan, met them with their new passports. So then they had passports. That was one thing I wanted to say. Another thing I wanted to pick up on as propos the second evacuation, and apropos, and just as regards, I think, a situation that we're all in to this day, which is with all the celebration of ourselves and the success and of them and their freedom and their future. Basically, it is a tragic story. And the number of requests that I think each and every one of us get, if there's been any media at all, immediately I get requests on Facebook, and people have given out my WhatsApp number. And I wake up to at least 30 messages from people I don't know, telling me about their grief and their fears and their need for help, and basically begging for help. And it's the most awful thing in the world, because on the one hand, you think at first, and still now, I try to answer everyone, but I don't have anything much to offer. And then if you respond and just say that you are so sorry for what's going on and you wish them well, and then they're so happy that some Westerner has responded to them, and then they respond to you again, and then your whole day can be gone with this. So you don't know what to do, but how do you not respond? And Rudabe, who was my very original friend on the robotics team, she showed me a list that she wrote on a notebook of 100 emails. People are just emailing any connection they might have to a Westerner, apropos of who deserves to go out and who doesn't deserve. Yes, it's the strong. Yes, it's the vulnerable, but mostly it's people who know somebody. And they just look up on Facebook a lot. They're really on Facebook, or they hear other evacuation stories. They try and find out who evacuated. They try and get an email. They try and write to that person. And another really painful thing to say is that anyone who worked with Americans or foreign troops, they're emailing to their emails, but those embassies have shut down. So the emails bounce back at them. I mean, it's super sad. And also, even with the evacuation, they're making their calculations as we're making our calculations. We say to our friend Walid, who's the husband of one of the robotics roles, we say, listen, we can take out 4 other members of your family, but we cannot take out 13 more members. And they live in very big family units over there, with lots of brothers, sisters, cousins, and they're all making calculations. So what we have here, for example, is Walid's brother, Javed, who's brought along his young nephews and nieces, but left behind his brothers and sisters because he figured he would try and give them a better life and save them. It's heartbreaking every day on that level. So I forgot where we were in the narrative.
Breaking our heart, basically.
So
if I can add to the.
Go ahead.
If I can add to it, I think it tells you something about international relations and political science and the subjects that Naomi was talking about in the beginning. I'm also getting a lot of calls from a lot of WhatsApps and calls and messages from Afghans. But I had the weirdest call I got was one day this call from an American number. This American guy on the line, he's saying, "Hi, I work with the government. I heard about what you did. I really need to get this Afghan family of a person that worked with us out. Can you help me?" So I asked him, "What do you mean you work with the government? Are you from the State Department?" And he says, "No, I'm from the Department of Defense." So this is so ridiculous that a guy from the strongest military of the strongest country in the world is calling some documentary filmmaker from Tel Aviv to ask her for help to get like some Afghan that worked for the Americans out. So I thought that was a really sad and incredible call. And the other thing I wanted to say, and to continue what Dana says, is that when we got to Tajikistan, Dana and I, we just hopped on the plane and we got to Tajikistan and we were so happy. We were so relieved and happy. And when we got there, the minister invited us for a big like celebration dinner. And we saw, when we saw the Afghans, and that's when I realized that this is not a moment of happiness at all. Of course, they're relieved that they're out of danger, but they left everything behind. They left their families behind. They left their lives behind. And they also crossed the border and they became a refugee with like unknown future. So it was kind of a very, very weird party that we went to because nobody was really happy. There was lots of food, but there were actually some of them crying. So that was the other thing I wanted to say. But back to Kunduz, Yotam, do you want to take it from there?
Sure. So that's like the really kind of intense part of the second evacuation. So our group was discovered by the Taliban, and the Taliban surrounded the what we thought was originally a safe house where they were hiding before the crossing. They were taking people's names, and we started receiving, all of us, like panicking messages that the Taliban are taking the men out, and they were beating the house owner who was hiding. The person who was helping us organize the second evacuation was out because he was trying to find a different border to cross. We thought at that point that maybe what the Taliban wants is money. So we actually arranged money that, we were supposed to pay them for the crossing. But no, that wasn't the issue. The issue was not that. They really, because between the first and the second group, there was almost a month that passed, and a lot of people tried to cross, and it became much more difficult and much more strict and much more dangerous in that sense. So it was pretty clear that we're not, they won't be able to cross, and they were surrounded by Taliban, and Taliban was threatening them. And then the Afghans themselves, which was also quite amazing to see, they kind of took the leadership, and quite a few of them from the different groups that we had there, tried to use their contacts and were able to convince the Taliban to release them, but under the condition that they will all go back to their homes in Kabul. And if they will try to cross the border again, they will all be shot or taken to prison. So then we had a dilemma together with our Afghan partners and friends, whether we should try another way or we should, give up, and because it's very risky, and it became more risky. And then we had a lot of kind of internal discussions and thoughts of what we can do. We were all together in Tajikistan waiting for them.
On the border.
On the border, exactly. And we've thought of going to another crossing, and we started driving there. And that's when we found out that the Taliban kind of arrested them, and there was no reception. It was very, very, very stressful situation. And then, we were also in touch with a lot of other groups, American groups and other NGOs and other activists and journalists and other groups that were organizing evacuations. And we realized that the only way out probably, or the most kind of feasible way out, is by a evacuation flight, not from Kabul, but from another city called Mazar-e-Sharif, another city in northern Afghanistan. And there was no commercial flight, so we had to hire a charter plane basically, which is extremely expensive, but was doable. There was one airline, an Afghan company, that was still doing it. So we got in touch with them and they told us, okay, if you want to do it, we can fix you a plane right now, but you have to transfer us huge amount of money, almost $400,000 in the next half an hour. So we called the donor that, a very generous donor, that was helping us, and immediately they transferred the money to the flight company. But then again, going back to the challenge that Dana mentioned, the passports. So in the second group, 100 out of 125, 41 didn't have passports. So we contacted again the Afghan ambassador in Moscow, Mr. Jawad, and very quickly they arranged passports for us and sent them to us to Tajikistan. And we were with these passports on the border, Dana, Ronnie, myself, and Anahita, carrying a box of 41 passports in this carbon box, walking around and kind of joking with the Tajiki border control that we have passports. In the beginning, they really thought we're crazy and who we are, because it's really, you think about the middle of nowhere, turn left, right, and then you get to this border. Really, it's no man's land. And we were there in the border, but the Tajikis were okay. And they told us that there is, in this kind of neutral zone between Afghanistan and Tajikistan, there is a driver that is kind of a messenger. And for some reason, we thought it was okay. And they even thought it was okay to transfer passports between these two countries. And our Afghan friends we were texting with them and they were waiting on the other side. So we gave these passports to this messenger, to this car, like small car that came from the Afghan side, and they took it, and just when we thought, okay, finally things are going in the right direction, unfortunately they didn't, and these passports were confiscated by the Taliban, which added a new layer of stress, because we thought, oh my God, the people would realize that we're smuggling passports to their country, and it will put all these people at a huge risk. But then again, another unexpected thing happens, and obviously what I'm sharing with you took about 2 days, so it was very, very stressful time. But we were given a message from the Taliban that if the people who actually own these passports will come and claim them, they will be able to receive them. And also through some contacts that our group had with the Taliban, they were able to talk to some big Taliban commanders. And they actually came to the border, family by family, basically, and claimed their passports from the Taliban. And they received it, which was a miracle that none of us expected. And they made their way to Mazar-e-Sharif, to the airport, to get on the charter flight. We didn't know, and that's again one of the most devastating parts. And I know Dana and Ronnie, who know some of these people, Dana especially was, we didn't know if these 41 people with new passports will be able to go on a flight. So we had a waiting list of other 41 people in case these people won't be able to go on a flight. So they were waiting outside the airport, and we didn't know until the very last moment who will be able to fly. And even at the airport, the Taliban stopped the people who had these 41 new passports and asked them, what are these passports? Who made these passports? Obviously, it looked weird because these passports were created in Moscow on the same day after the Taliban took over. But thankfully, again, and another miracle, it was all like a series of miracles. The flight company was able to negotiate with them, with the Taliban, and thank God everyone was able to board the plane. And I remember we were all kind of using this flight radar. I don't know if you know that. It's like this app that you can track planes movement around the world. And we saw that the plane was actually taking off from Afghanistan to Tajikistan. And you know, it was such an unbelievable relief. And after an hour, it's only an hour flight, they landed in Tajikistan, which is where we received and saw them. But you know, as I mentioned, during this unbelievable joy and relief was also a lot of devastation and stress for the people who couldn't make it, or for some people who made it to the flight, but their husband or wife or children or couldn't make it. So it was really last minute thing. Last thing I'll share was, which even when we got to Tajikistan and these people, we knew that they were safe. It's not the end of the story, because again, we thought, okay, now that they're finally in Tajikistan, landed there, and they were waiting in this transit area in the airport, we thought that the UAE will take them as they took our first group. But very quickly we found out that the UAE wanted to make sure that these people all have visas to other countries before they take them. So unlike the first group, the second group, they were not willing to accept like that. So we had to come up with another country. And that's when I think Dana remembered that she heard some people were going to Albania. And we reached out to one of our donors who we knew had a personal relationship with the Prime Minister of Albania. They called the Prime Minister, Edi Rama. And again, in 5 minutes, he basically said yes, which was pretty unbelievable. Albania, one of the poorest countries in Europe, took the highest number of Afghan refugees, 4,000, including our group of 125. So we flew together with them to Albania, where they're staying in a very nice hotel. I will mention, I remember that Naomi was mentioning that, which is where Dana is right now, in the nice hotel, in the nice supermarket. But we are paying for their stay there. So just to clarify that, we are paying, we are sponsoring their stay in this hotel. So it's a kind of it was good for us because we needed a shelter, and it's also good for Albania for economic reasons. So this is more or less where we are today, right now.
In Albania, in the supermarket.
I just want to add that they, for 3.5 days, we actually didn't know what country would accept them. Once we turned to Albania, they did turn around quickly and say we could come here. But for 3 days, and Tajikistan wouldn't let the group out of the airport. So they stayed in the airport terminal after all that long journey and the horrible experience that they had in Kunduz with being surrounded by the Taliban, and then traveling to
66 hours in the airport with tiny babies.
In a terminal room with just, and these are also people that are, just thrown into this experience. Usually men and women do not mix like this. And here we were with no beds, no nothing, just with benches kind of a terminal room. They brought in food from the airlines, like plane food. And we went and bought blankets, and we bought this kind of roving Wi-Fi thing. And one guy held it, and then 10 by 10 people went up to him and connected their phones so that they could tell their family back home that they'd made it across. There were only 2 toilets. For 3 days, we sat there and we were very stressed. Again, we were so relieved they were there, but stressed so as to find another country when we realized the UAE wasn't going to work out. And yes, and then we took off to Albania, I think also in the middle of the night, I can't even remember. Oh no, we landed here in Albania in the middle of the night, and it was rainy. And then another one of these moments that Ronnie noted was that we walked out of the terminal in like 2 seconds and went and had coffee at the Tirana airport for about 7 hours while they got processed. And so they got processed as refugees, and then came here to this place, which is not exactly a 5-star hotel, but it's a closed kind of resort. It's a summer resort near the beach, and it's fine. And I think that since then they've kind of a community life here, people. And then IsraAid, up until now, we were really working just with Yotam, and we were individuals. And then IsraAid kicked into high gear, and Yotam will talk more about it, but they've come and basically are running the camp, which is something that they do have a lot of experience in so that people have daily activities and a school and all sorts of things like that. Something which unfortunately there is none of in Abu Dhabi. So Abu Dhabi is a great place to go, first of all, because they accepted us. They have like some 10,000 refugees there, and they're kept in very close, they're kept in this humanitarian city. They're not allowed out. And I worry for the mental health of some of our, especially the younger girls. The cyclists are all like 18, 19 years old, and they're kind of stuck in their hallways. They don't have too many activities. At one point, we got them Amazon gift cards for 35 euros, and I taught them how to do, ordering something online, and that's been, I would say, the highlight of their months there. I mean, they're not doing a lot except for waiting, and the anticipation and the fear also that, I mean, they're so keen to find a home, obviously, and fearful of being sent back, although that is not something that could happen, but they always have that fear with them, and also very fearful of their families back home. And also as the situation deteriorates in Afghanistan and people are going hungry in Afghanistan, the guilt, I think, is growing, that they are the survivors, that they are the ones that are out having good meals, or in the case of, here in Albania, they're also allowed out of the camp. So they went on a day trip the other day to go see a waterfall or something like that. And they have a good time and feel very guilty at the same time.
Wow. For the interest of time, I would like us to maybe have a concluding comment from each one of you, something that you think is really important to share about your personal experience, your hope for the future for these people, your concerns, something that you find we didn't got to yet, and it's important not to leave the floor without it. So maybe we'll start with Ronnie.
I want to go back to something that Tam talked about that moment that the passports were at the hands of confiscated by the Taliban, and the group was already in Mazar Sharif, and the flight was supposed to go the next day. And it was very intense for us, and we were feeling very helpless. That was very hard, being there on the border, and the group is in trouble and you're helpless. You can't do a lot for them, and you have to just see, give your best advice and see what comes next. But there was also something very inspiring about it, because when there were some people in the group, a lot of them actually at different points decided that they're taking their fate in their own hands, and they're not only being led by this group of Israelis and Americans and whatever, but they're also taking their fate in their own hands. And some of them just decided, we're going to drive all night back to the checkpoint in Kunduz and try to get our passports out. And that's what they did. And that was so inspiring. This is just a small story. There were like a few incidents like that when these people just decided, we're not here just to receive other people's help, but we're going to help ourselves. And that's, I think, what's going on also in Albania at the camp, or you could see it at the Dushanbe airport terminal where they were at for 3 days. People were really taking responsibility for their group, and they're constantly, even this morning when I had a call with someone, he said that spent the whole night yesterday at the hospital accompanying this guy that had to go to the hospital in Albania, and he said, these are my people, I have to help them. So that was really very, very inspiring. And you asked me before, Tal, what I thought was like why we were successful in doing it. And I think that we had like our determination, and we were very lucky also. We had good partners, and we had a lot of media attention to the issue. I mean, there was a lot of media attention to the issue of whatever was going on in Afghanistan. So we can harness all that attention in the direction of getting help from governments, getting the diplomatic effort to succeed, getting financial help from very generous philanthropists. And the other thing is that what I said before is our Afghan partners, that they were so smart and creative, and above all, they were knowledgeable of how things work in their own country. So that's, I think, kind of the things that made this happen.
Yuta?
I think one thing to mention, Ronnie mentioned it a little bit, but we've been working with refugees around the world in many different countries and contexts, and I think what one of the major difference with this group, this is really a group of leaders, whether it's the robotics team, the cyclists, some of the other, we also had like female judges, we also had actually the family of the Afghan ambassador to the UN with us. When we realized that, we realized really they have, first of all, they're incredible individuals. They have amazing connections. They're very creative. They're able to find a lot of solutions. And even right now in the camp in Albania, they are actually leading the camp. They are running a school for refugees that is led by refugees for refugees. They are, very involved in their resettlement process. So I think for me, this is kind of the main takeaway of how really this is not a one-sided operation. It's a teamwork, and our team really includes the Afghan leaders themselves. And I think it's very, very inspiring, and it's it also makes working with refugees in many countries, including even in Israel, and refugees and asylum seekers, and seeing how difficult it is, not just the escape, but actually the resettlement and the integration. These groups of Afghans that we supported, I'm very optimistic, and I think they will have amazing future, and they will be an incredible asset to every community and to every country that will accept them. We are still in this process. This is still very much our focus, but really just before the new year, on Friday, we received this amazing news that Canada, which we were not sure, because there's more than 1 million people who applied for Canada. But we received the news that our group will be processed to Canada and kind of prioritized and expedited, because we were worried that either they won't be able to make it or it will take years. And now it seems like it will take weeks. So that's, still fingers crossed. So we still have to have a lot of work to do. And Dana is actually leading this effort for us. But it was amazing news just before the new year. And I think Dana is with the group in Albania. She can share how the celebration looks like there while we're still working on it.
I wanted to bring up something else at the end, although I don't want to end on something negative, but it is something that Naomi brought up, and we're all Israelis, is that why couldn't Israel help more in an official way? And I'm no person in like Hasbara, but the effect that us Israelis have had on these Afghans and on their families and on their future children in seeing Israel in a different light. And that's not why we got into it. But let me say that it has been a sea change. And also through, actually, my dad is very involved in something called Yadid L'Chinuch, which is taking retired people in Israel and having them teach to Israeli high schoolers usually. But we got a whole bunch of them to do private English classes for some of the refugees here who really, the thing they most want is to learn English. And so you have all these Afghans at the camp speaking to their Shlomit or Miri or Shlomo up in the north. And, the other day it was raining in Israel, and the Afghans are saying, how are your parents? How are they dealing with the rain? So we have this like real connection. But imagine what it could have been like if Israel might, and I understand that it is not simple matters. I understand that we have our own refugee issues in Israel. I understand all of it. But some empathy and kindness and openness of us, Israel, as a country, not as individuals, would have gone a long way. Us, a country of immigrants and refugees. So it's something that I really haven't totally processed, but for sure, that's been a big disappointment to me. That's the one thing. And the other thing about the celebrations and about the Canada, it was very funny because actually another friend of mine just donated we have a running group in the morning where we go do exercise, just the girls, and we do like the 7-minute workout and we do jogging and then we sit and have coffee, and it's like the greatest time of the day for a lot of these girls, and almost none of them have sneakers, right? So they're like clunking around in non-sneakers. And so we got the money and I went into town with them. We took a little minivan and we went to buy sneakers. And in the middle of the sneaker store, which by the way, which also hilarious, because I'm like pointing at the, imitation Adidas, that's what I think they should buy. And they're choosing the Chanel shoes because, that's life. And so I'm like, no, move away from the Chanel section. And then in the middle of all this, the emails start coming in to each of the principal applicants that Canada has accepted them has given them preliminary case numbers, which means they can now go on and apply, which is the world. I mean, it took a lot of effort and pushing and super complicated. And Yotam and I have been on dozens of conversations, if not hundreds, with State Department people that should refer us to Canada and then having influence in Canada to get that to happen. But the funny thing was, this was, all they've been talking about for months is how much they want to go to Canada. B, they were somehow more interested in the sneakers and the Chanel. I mean, it was a very, very funny real life situation, but I couldn't tell what was making them happier. But of course, like, people are thrilled. And now we're filling out endless forms. And again, we're ending this session here, so we didn't have time to get into anything. And I was wondering how we'd fill 2 hours, but also, like, how do the people get chosen and the priorities? See, in the back of my little diary that I carry around, I have the priorities, like who are who is eligible to go to Canada. And so you have people, for example, who are cyclists and robotics girls the most high risk, or is someone maybe who worked in the security services the highest risk? Who makes these decisions? And then Canada and the West has their own, like if you're LGBTQ, that is considered highest risk. Or if you're a woman activist, that's because, so, everyone has their own ideas of what is high risk and what is eligibility and how you play into those. It's a very interesting, larger question of immigration and refugees and movement. Anyway, I'm going on and on. So that's the end for me.
Since we still have a lot to hear from you, we can also shift the Q&A to our Facebook page and then hear a little bit more from you. How do you feel about that?
Sure.
Sure?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do that, and we'll do the question period on the Facebook. So Dana, go ahead and just elaborate on that, if that's something you open that up.
No, actually, sorry to go against the crowd here. I think it would be interesting to hear some questions if anyone had anything that they wanted to steer towards.
Okay, so first of all, I wanna invite a question from one of our students, Lee, and then we'll see, because I want to prioritize the department students before we open to people from outside. So Lee, go ahead. Where are you?
Hi, I'm here. It's good to see you, and it was very fascinating, and kol hakavod, you're really saving lives. And I wanted to ask if you could talk to us a little more about the political constraints that there are, if any, because after all, some of you are Israelis or act by the name of IsraAid, and this is an enemy state after all. So I wanted to hear more about that.
Sure, I can. Should I answer, or are we taking more questions, Tal?
No, let's start with this and then.
Okay. Thank you, Lee. So IsraAid, as I mentioned in the beginning, is non-political and non-governmental. But yes, you're right. The name is it's very clear where we are from. And I can talk about it for hours and give a long lecture, because we worked in Iraq, we worked with Syrian refugees, we worked in Bangladesh, we worked in Indonesia, we worked in quite a few places that don't have diplomatic relation with Israel. And we always find a way and partners. Specifically in this operation here, most people, when we were dealing with the actual evacuation, most people didn't know where we're from. They knew Dana. I mean, some of them knew Dana, not all of them, but some that knew Dana, I guess they knew that Dana can talk about it, that has an Israeli connection, but they also knew that she's not just Israeli, and she was in Afghanistan. But they definitely didn't know that an Israeli organization is an Israeli group of people is running in this operation. First, because we didn't want to emphasize that in that part, and we also didn't want to add an extra risk, and also we were not always sure about WhatsApp and what kind of communication is safe or not safe. But once people were out, they heard that it was an Israeli group of people behind this, and an Israeli NGO that was very involved. And we didn't get any negative reaction, really. I guess some people were surprised. They didn't expect that. They thought we were Americans or something like that. But the reactions that we received were really positive. And I think more interestingly is that, after some time, they became very interested. And I know that I'm getting, and I'm sure Dana and Ronnie we're getting messages in Hebrew from the Afghans. They're actually saying Shabbat Shalom or Chanukah Sameach or whatever. And they're very interested. I think first they understand that we're not the government and that we don't have a political agenda. Second, these are people who ran away from extremists. So, I think they are very open.
Do you face any limitations from the Israeli government? That's what was I referred to.
You meant the Israeli government. I think Dana mentioned it a little bit. Well, the government is, so to be clear about the government role in this and in others. So, we had some positive support from some people in government, and we had some disappointing reactions from other people in government. So the embassy who represent the state of Israel, in that case, it was the embassy in Uzbekistan that overseeing Tajikistan, was very helpful. The ambassador was very helpful with her limited resources. We were disappointed that Israel was not taking some of these Afghans either for permanent or temporary shelter. But the government as a whole was very positive about our efforts. They liked the fact that Israelis were involved. There was a lot of media about it. It was in CNN, it was in the Daily Telegraph, it was in different leading newspapers and media, and they were happy. And also, we didn't mention that part of the story, but we were able to evacuate a woman who was born as Jewish from Afghanistan and her family. And that came as a request directly from President Herzog, from Bougie's office, to support this family. And we were able to support them. So obviously, they were also very, very positive and grateful for that. So no, we didn't face negative reaction. We were disappointed, as Dana mentioned, that Israel didn't do more to support these refugees.
If I may say something too, I think my sense is that in Afghanistan, people are not into it's not, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not part of like their daily, I don't think they know a lot about it. And I had this, when we finally got into the airport in Dushanbe, where they were, when they arrived from Afghanistan, so a few of them came up to me and said, we noticed that when you talk between yourselves, you don't speak English. What language are you speaking? What language do you speak? So that was weird for them, and that's when they started like noticing that we were not like some, I guess, I don't know what they thought, Americans or something. So I told one of them, well, guess where I'm from? And he said the US, and I said no, and he said UK, and I said no. I said, give me a hint. I said the Middle East. So he goes, oh, are you from Lebanon? I said no. Are you from Egypt? I said no. Between Lebanon and Egypt, he couldn't, like, it went on for a few minutes. He couldn't figure out it was Israel. It was kind of beyond his imagination. And I think, as Dana said before, this is something that is very strong. This experience of letting other people see of other sides of Israel that they're used to in the media. So that was also makes this encounter powerful.
One of them heard me speaking on the phone to a girlfriend, and now every time they see me, like half the camp goes, "Eze chavaya, eze chavaya."
Thanks so much, Lee. Do you need more clarification, or are you good?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Veronica, you'll be our next question. Where's
Hi.
Veronica?
Well, thanks so much for sharing this really incredible story. I was wondering if you could talk about like the differences between initiatives like yours that are so, I don't know, that seem, based on so many miracles and so many individual efforts that you've spoken about, versus more like official rescue channels, and what are the relationships between initiatives like these, or how many other initiatives like yours happened on the ground, and whether or not there were collaborations?
I'll address that. I mean, that's what I sort of started out by saying, is shockingly, there were no really official plans of evacuations. I mean, where was the plan? That's exactly what needed to happen. Before the Americans just flew away, they needed to have thought through all the people. There's something called an SIV, a special immigration visa, which they were giving out by the tens of thousands to people who had worked with them in American embassies or with American troops or whatever. And then they haven't honored that. A lot of those people, according to some report, 40,000 people with SIVs, that means they've been totally vetted and have spent years working with the Americans, were left behind. There was no official plan, or now the State Department is trying to figure out what to do with the people left behind, but basically it's a mess. And I think that most of the initiatives of getting people out of Afghanistan in this recent takeover of the Taliban came from totally ad hoc groups like ours working over WhatsApp and Signal. I really think that. And we're in touch with a lot of them because we all cooperated. Like I think Ronnie mentioned, one group said, can you please take this judge? And we said, can you please take this family that was left outside the airport when we took off? And people, I mean, that's also been an inspiring part of this, is how people from all over the world, by the way, have just reached out to each other. And you hear people working on stuff and you contact them and they tell you what they're working on. So one group needs money, another group needs a plane, another group has a plane but has 2 spots. So I think that there's been a lot of that going on. And unfortunately, it's filling a vacuum that in a way, I mean, we should not be doing this work. This work had to have been organized in a much better, more effective, more organized, coordinated manner by countries, I would think. I mean, but that did not happen. So.
I think their plan was to, at least for some of them, like the people that worked, like for example, at the American Embassy, we had one woman and her family that worked at the American Embassy, and others that worked with the Americans. They just at some point got emails saying, you can come to the airport and we will evacuate you. But the problem is nobody could get into the airport. I mean, getting into the airport was so difficult because there were, like Yotam said, terror attacks. and tens of thousands of people were at the gates trying to jump over them, and the Taliban were there. So it was practically impossible to get into the airport. So the system that the Americans, at least for the embassy workers, put in place wasn't working.
And in an attempt to make some order, the Americans sent people by email, I guess, kind of visas, which they were supposed to wave above their heads in these tunnels filled with people outside the airport so as to get into the airport. And now people who have been left behind in Afghanistan still have these visas and are telling us, but we have these visas. And it's left to us to say, actually, because we've checked with the State Department, those visas were only good until the end of August. And now, again, you're on your own. So really it was not well planned. And I'm amazed that someone in the administration didn't lose their job, but they did not. And I think America's moved on from it to a certain extent.
Yeah. But just to add on that, there were other groups who did evacuations, not formal, not governments per se. Most of the other evacuations, not all of them, were either led by, I guess, journalists, activists, and many by actually former military people, mainly Americans, but also Canadians, who felt personally responsible for what the government wasn't able to coordinate or facilitate. So they actually took the lead and did it on their own. So there was quite a few groups of American veterans and ex-generals and former military who came together to organize these evacuations. They mostly did it by air, so similar to our second evacuation. And we are in touch with quite a few of these groups. They also evacuated some people by land to Pakistan, which, the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan is one of the most both dangerous, but also kind of popular border for smuggling in the world for everything, people, drugs, you name it. So a lot of people were evacuated through this border. And still some of these operations are going on, although a lot less than before, because there are now approximately, in terms of numbers, 70,000 Afghans who were evacuated in the last few months since the Taliban took over and are now stuck in different camps, similar to our groups in Abu Dhabi, Albania, Qatar, and elsewhere. And even in the US, there were quite a few stories recently in the New York Times of how many of the Afghans who made it to the US finally, they're still stuck in military bases in very difficult conditions. So unfortunately, this journey is not over yet for most of these people, and they're still dealing with tremendous challenges.
The most efficient government operation that I have heard of, at least, was the Ukrainian government operation, which was actually pretty incredible. And I think the last days of August, they just landed there with their commando units, and their soldiers went into the city to pick up whoever they wanted to pick up and extract. And then they took over one of the airport gates from the Taliban by force and let all of their convoys and buses of their people into the airport and then flew them out. So that was the most efficient government evacuation that I have heard of, at least.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. The next question will be by Anna. Can you turn on your camera?
I can. Hello. To tell you the truth, what kind of practical advice would you have for people approaching funders for potentially like getting a charter flight together and doing this themselves? Now, and I what you said just then is actually, indicative, because now is different than then. The timing is very different and the situation is different.
So Anna, you're trying to evacuate people? I didn't get.
Yeah. Someone who wants to run a rescue operation now and is approaching funders, what would you recommend that they say have in place?
So
how to approach?
It's a longer conversation, and we're happy to take it offline, and we can share with you our contact information. I think, look, I mean, it's what I'll say is a bit cynical and a bit frustrating, but having been in a lot of crises and emergencies and dealing with a lot of donors, unfortunately, the one thing that I learned is that media attention equals donor attention. And when there's no media attention, it's very difficult to get donors' attention. Now, that's not true for 100% of the times, but it's true for 99.9% of the times. And in our case, it worked, it was very clearly like that. When the media was interested and there was a lot of world attention, and it was very much related to the US. So a lot of US-based donor or people who are connected, or in that one of them was Canadian, they felt actually guilty for what their government was able or not able to achieve or to support, and then they stepped in. Also, the other thing that was that made it successful from a fundraising perspective was also that it was very tangible. Very clearly we were able to show results. It was a lot of money that we asked these people. This operation so far cost us almost $2 million, just, to put things in perspective. But people were again, were happy to support because they saw very clear results. And obviously there was a sense of urgency. So all of these created a situation where people wanted to support. It's much more difficult to raise money now for evacuation. But I think the key when you're talking about future evacuations from Afghanistan is to be able to demonstrate the level of vulnerability and the risk. And Dana mentioned it before. I think that we also learned a lot through this operation that there may be people who are more at risk than others. Even within our group, we had a female judge that we evacuated who actually sent Taliban people to prison. So obviously she's in a higher risk than a girl who was cycling. Again, who was also at risk for riding her bicycle, but maybe at a lower risk. So I think that the assessing and trying to assess as much as possible the level of risk would also help, and being able then to communicate it to the donors would be very helpful. I think the other key piece, which is, again, it's not just related to fundraising, it's for getting into this evacuation, and which we didn't think about so much in the beginning, was really to make sure that there is a clear resettlement plan. And this part is actually the most challenging one, because we were so stressed to get these people out of Afghanistan. And we knew that we have some political connection and that hopefully they will go to Canada or other countries, but we really didn't have a clear plan. And one of the biggest challenges right now is that, a lot of the other people who were evacuated also came out without a plan. I think our advantage comparing to other group A, that we do have a lot of connections, and we are very, very determined to make sure these people reach their final destination. There's a story that in Abu Dhabi right now, there's about 12,000 Afghan refugees, and most of them have no idea where they will be going. So our group of 42 people who are there are really an exception, because they have our support and our backing, and they actually do have a path for resettlement. So that's another thing to figure out, and I think it's very important before evacuating people to have a plan for resettlement, and also to take under consideration that may cost a lot of money, the actual resettlement, not just the evacuation. In our case, a lot of the funds is now spent on keeping these people in Albania. We're paying, just to give you, some perspective, we're paying.
Yotam, just a second. I think Dana has to leave and she wants to say goodbye.
Okay.
And Yotam, I need you. We have an important call.
Yeah, we have another call actually with the government of Portugal in 2 minutes.
And also, I'm in the supermarket and some of my friends just walked in, so I'm going to introduce you to Shabnam and Sultan over here. And then we have Samim. And here we have some of the cyclists walking in. So everyone's coming to say hi to the class, just to show that we're real people over here in Albania. Okay, that was great.
Thank you guys.
All right. If I got in touch with the Sophie Davis, if I got in touch with Tal, do you think I could maybe take this conversation offline? Thank you very much. I really appreciate everything you've just said.
Tom, get on the other call as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye.
We're talking now it's exactly on that topic. We're talking now to the head of migration, the equivalent of the Minister of Migration in Portugal, to see if we can take another group there. So it's a work in progress.
Yutamar, will you be able to stay for a few more minutes?
For 2 more minutes, actually.
2 more minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think Ronnie is here. Yeah,
you leave Ronnie with us?
I'm here.
I just wanted to see if one of the courses students have a question, because it's their class and I would like to give them the opportunity to be the ones asking.
So I'm sorry, I actually have to run. I see now it's 4:31.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so one question that I had before we going to go to the questions that are on the chat is about the communication technology. There was one point where Yotan said there was no reception, and I was thinking about how we live our lives, thinking that we have reception everywhere, and then you're talking about this rescue in the border of Afghanistan or Tajikistan in some no man's land, and the expectation is that we will have these communications ability. And so I was wondering how the social media and WhatsApp and Facebook impacted these efforts.
I think that I think that maybe one of the good things the Americans did in Afghanistan in the past 20 years is that they have reception practically everywhere. I mean, there are very few moments where we couldn't get in touch with people inside Afghanistan. There were such moments, but there were very few. And while we were at the border and the whole crisis with the Taliban in Kunduz was happening, we were at a very remote place. Even in Israel, when you go, you can find remote places. So that's why we were we're stopping the car at places where we had reception and trying to figure things out from there.
Why don't you listen to call Oren and see what he wanted? You don't want me to buy for the kids? Ask them if they need anything.
Maybe mute Dorothy. Tal.
Who?
Okay. So social media, of course, they're all on social media. And of course, we had our instructions in English and in Dari and in Pashtun, in every language, of how to wipe your phone. This was something we had to remind them to do every few hours or every few days, in case they get held by the Taliban, so they wouldn't be able to look at their phone and see that they're actually planning to escape. And so they had really clear instructions how to wipe their phones, how to upload their important stuff and data, pictures, whatever, to some cloud or send it to a friend and then wipe their phone. So that was our instructions, and I think what was really extraordinary in this operation was that it was all done via WhatsApp and Signal and Google Maps, and it was just incredible. We could follow them around like that, and so
technology at your service.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we had a question from Galia, but I think Galia left. So let's hear Shmuel. Shmuel,
Yeah,
I hear. You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to ask you next question. Everybody of us knows that Taliban, this bad, negative and anti-democratic movement, but together with it, I want to ask you what this fact of contribution of Taliban to struggle against American occupation of Afghanistan. From one side, Taliban, this bad and anti-democratic organization and extremist organization, but from second side, this movement that fight against United States occupation of Afghanistan. And I want to ask you to expand on this point.
Well, it is very complicated, like every struggle. And actually, the Taliban, they enjoy huge popular support in Afghanistan for all sorts of reasons. I mean, they took over the country without a fight. The Afghan government, supported by the US, had been trained by the US military. They had the best military equipment, tanks and helicopters, and from whatever the Americans can offer. And they had something like 250, I think, 1,000 strong army. And the Taliban had something like 70,000 fighters without much like financial support, but still they took over the country in just a few weeks without maybe not a single shot, a few shots. So I think the Taliban do enjoy huge popular support in Afghanistan, and they have in Afghanistan, there's also ethnic struggles. There's like two big ethnic groups, the Pashtuns and the Tajiks, and all the struggles of the different groups are part of the ethnic struggle also. And I think the Americans and the Afghan government, backed by the Americans, wasn't also doing a great job by a lot of the Afghans, especially in rural places. There had been misuse of money, and they had been, and not all of the Afghans agree with more liberal policies that the Afghan government adopted. Like, for example, we have this judge in the group. She was the first female judge in Badakhshan province. It's a remote province in eastern Afghanistan, and she was appointed to the special court for the elimination of violence against women. So that's something that the Americans expected the Afghan government to do, to start fighting against violence against women, and to start having more equal rights for women. So she was actually the first female judge appointed to that court. And she had been threatened by the Taliban around Badakhshan province way before this whole thing happened this summer, because this is going against very ancient traditions in these parts. And people are feeling, like everywhere when change comes, people are feeling threatened. Their traditions are being threatened, their way of life is being threatened, and maybe that's the source of the popular support for the Taliban also. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Ani, I think it's way beyond the scope of our conversation today. Yeah, I think the complexity of the situation in Afghanistan and the Taliban has a lot to do both with the U.S. and with the complexity within the Afghan nation, or some would say that there is no thing like an Afghan nation. But I think it is time to finish our discussion for today. Hopefully we will be able to have additional or follow-up event with some of the people that are now in Albania. And I would like to thank you for really pushing forward to make this happen. And to Nomi, who really helped us kind of look at the situation from a wider, broader point of view. Also to Dana and Yotam who joined us, and to all the support team that supported this event.
Thank you for having us, Tal.
You're welcome. Thank you all for joining us today.
You're gonna meet the real interesting people in the next event. Real incredible women.
We are looking forward to it.
תודה רבה.
תודה לך.
Thank you.
להתראות.
Bye bye.
ביי.